Welcome back everybody to 10 Codes. So today we're going to take a look at how we can work with EthSigner to send transactions from our decentralized application to an Ethereum client. Now, why do we want to use EthSigner? So I'm going to use this visual representation that the EthSigner documentation provides. I think it does a really good job of explaining what EthSigner is responsible for doing. Taking a closer look at this, we have the decentralized applications. You can use Web3.js, Web3.j, whatever to build that application. It's going to essentially need to talk to an Ethereum client to send and execute transactions. So now on an enterprise level, you don't want to mishandle your private keys in that process. So therefore, you're going to want to use something like Hashi Corp Vault or Azure Key Vault to manage those private keys that are responsible for signing the transactions that the decentralized application is trying to send to the Ethereum client. So essentially, EthSigner is the middleman that is going to query from the Hashi Corp Vault, for example, the private keys required to sign a transaction from the decentralized application, and then it's going to send it to the Ethereum client for execution, and then it's going to return the transaction hash to the decentralized application, and the application does whatever it needs to do with that information. So the Ethereum client that we're going to use today to demonstrate EthSigner is Ganache. Ganache is going to allow us to quickly spin up a test network that we can connect to. You can see we have it running on 127.0.0.1, port 8545. That's going to be some useful information when we're going to configure EthSigner later. Alright, then with that being said, let's go ahead and install the dependencies onto our computer. So first of all, let's go ahead and download Docker. You can get it at docker.com. Download it for your respective operating system. The next thing we're going to need is the binaries for EthSigner. You can get it within the EthSigner documentation. I would go there because they have the latest and greatest. Just go to install binary distribution and click on package binaries. And I'm going to download the zip, I believe. I actually have it already downloaded, so I'm going to go navigate to it. I placed it on my desktop, as you can see right here, and then I unzipped it, which produced this folder, which you have the bin, lib, and then license, and then licenses. So we want to open up a terminal, and I like to use terminal to navigate things. However, you can do the same things that I'm doing using your Finder or Explorer. Alright, so once you've unzipped EthSigner and just have the folder with all these contents in there, you want to go ahead and create a folder, and I just made it container underscore build. You can name it whatever, but this is where our Docker container context is going to be living. So drag EthSigner into that folder because we'll need it there. And then we're going to also make a folder called key file gen or generator, something that denotes that this is where our password and private key generation is going to be occurring. So that being said, let's actually start there. And opening this folder, it's going to be empty initially. We want to open a terminal here. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal and navigate to wherever your key file generator folder is. So mine is on the desktop, and I just named it key file gen. Oops. Okay. Yes, I do want to grant access. All right, I'm in there. And as you can see, if I do ls, and this is for Mac, obviously, list all the files, nothing in there. So let's do touch, and we're going to make a file called create.key.js. And another thing, right, you'll need to install Node.js. This is going to be essential to generate your key file we're going to be using to set up EthSigner. I know there's other methods you can generate this, for example, using Web3.j, but for this tutorial, I'm just going to be using Node.js, so definitely have that installed if you don't already. Let's go ahead and continue our key generation. Now you can use VS Code to edit this file, or you can also just use Vim. Well, that's not what I want. Vim, and then the file name that you want to open and edit up, and then hit I to insert new things and then save it. That's a quicker way to do it. Or you can use VS Code, IntelliJ, whatever, to edit the file we just created named create.key.js. package.js. Once you have your editor open, what we want to do is, alright, so once you have your editor open, let's navigate to the EthSigner documentation. The EthSigner documentation provides us with the code to generate our key file. So let's go ahead and copy it, and in our editor, let's paste it in there. This is coming directly from the documentation. We're going to provide it our private key that we're going to use to sign transactions, as well as a password associated with it. And this password could be anything, but just make sure you remember it because we're going to need it for configuring EthSigner later. So let's go ahead and get the private key of the account that we want to use. Let's just use the first account listed. And now if you're using, let's say, Hyperledger Bisu, you probably will have this information in your Genesis file. Essentially, it's the private key that is associated with the account. So password, let's just use a password. Oops. And everything looks good. And let's save it and do escape and then WQ. I just saved that file. Now we have a key generation little script. Hopefully you have by now installed Node.js, which will allow you to have NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. So if you don't, look into that. I'll have some links down in the description. But essentially, once you have that installed, do npm init. It's gonna set up our project. You can just hit enter throughout everything. Doesn't really matter. As you can see, we just created the package.json. Next, we're gonna do npm install web3. Alright, so it looks good. If you get any errors, don't mind those. As long as you have your node modules folder created, you're fine. One thing I forgot is that we need to point our script to use the Ganache instance that we have running. So let's go ahead and open up our create key.js file. And as you can see, it's pointing to 127.0.1 port 8590 when it's actually 8545. You just want to make sure that the HTTP provider matches the RPC server of your Ganache or your Hyperledger Bisu or whatever Ethereum node that you're using. Alright, so we are good to execute that create key.js script. So do node and then create key.js. And as you can see, it provided some output, and that's going to be our key file. You're going to want to copy it from the last bracket, or from the beginning bracket to the last bracket, as you can see. Make sure that's the whole thing you want to copy. And what we want to do is, let's go back to our container builds underscore folder, and let's open up a terminal here. So I'm just going to do a new terminal and cd to the container underscore build, which is in the desktop, and then container underscore build. And let me do touch, and essentially touch is just creating a new file, and this one is going to be called keyfile.key. And then I'm going to edit it using Vim, so keyfile.key. You can use VS Code or whatever IDE you would like. I just find it easier to do this. And I'm going to paste the output from our script, right? So essentially we gave our script a private key as well as a password, and it did its thing and gave us this. This is going to be what's used to sign transactions in EthSigner. We're going to be doing the file-based signatures. You can use the Hashi Corp Vault method. That'll probably be another video, but this is just using a file base. So this is the file that's going to be used to sign our transactions. Let's save this file, and let's create another file in this same container build directory, and let's call it password file. Password, and let's go ahead and open that up. I don't know what I just did there. And let's type in our password, which I think was password 123. No quotes or anything. Save that. Alright, so as you can see, we have created two files and we've written our information in there. And then we also have the EthSigner binaries in there. So great, we're doing great. Let's stay within that container underscore build folder, and let's create another file called Docker file. And let's open that up to edit. So vim Docker file. I'm gonna use the provided Docker file in the GitHub of the EthSigner. So if you go to EthSigner and then Docker and then Docker file, this is a good start, and you can make your own modifications to it depending on how you need the EthSigner to be ran. But we're just going to use the basic provided. We're just going to add a few things to it. I just pasted it into the Docker file that I just created. So one, I want to add the key file as well as the password file as a part of the Docker build. So let's do copy and then key file dot key, and then we'll put it in folder within the Docker container here, key file dot key, and then copy password file dot password. All right, great. So now that we have that set up, let's keep the expose 8545 because we're gonna expose the Ganache instance that's running on port 8545 on our host to EthSigner container. And then the entry point, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna use a file-based configuration for EthSigner. You can use the flag-based signer, which essentially means that you're gonna be adding flags to this EthSigner entry point. So it'd be comma and then quotes and then the flag. So you could do, I think the required one is chain ID, and then do equal and then chain ID. However, what we're gonna do is just pass one flag, and that's gonna be config dash file, equals, and then we're gonna point it to the opt config dot toml, right? And then we're actually gonna have to copy that too, along with the password file and key file. So copy, and then we're gonna have to create it as well. So copy config dot toml. We're gonna copy it to opt and then config dot toml. All right, great. So now that we've copied over the dependencies and set the entry point to use the config dash file flag and point it to the config.toml file, let's leave everything as is and save this document. Oh yeah, one thing we want to do to make our lives easier before we save it, let's insert one thing right here. Let's do cmd, and then we're gonna do quotes, and let's do file-based signer. All right, perfect. So this is where you would change into Hashi Corp or another type of signer, but for this tutorial, we're gonna use file-based signer. Let's go ahead and save this. Now that we've created the Docker file, just make sure that you have Docker running. As you can see, I have it installed and running. And essentially what we want to do is within the container underscore build folder, you're gonna do Docker and then build, and let's give it a tag, so that dot and then forward slash. So it's, oh, we have the name incorrectly, so let's just change this. Let's just get rid of the version number. You can keep it there, but for this tutorial I'm just gonna get rid of it so it's consistent with the Docker file. So that should fix error 2 out of 6. And then the config.toml, so we have to create that. So before we do, okay, that's one thing I forgot. So let's do touch config.toml. So we just created that, and let's edit it. So vim config.toml. So our config.toml folder, all we're gonna do is paste in these configurations. You can copy and paste it. I'll probably provide it somewhere in the description, or you can just copy it, pause the video. But these are the essential configuration parameters that we're gonna need to specify. So first of all is chain ID. So that's the chain ID of your Ethereum node, and then our downstream HTTP host. So that is gonna also be important. And because it's gonna be a Docker container, we're gonna need to point to the host.docker.internal. This is going to be telling EthSigner to point to the host of the Docker container that's running, which is going to be our machine, which also happens to be the same network that's running Ganache or Ethereum client. So depending on what your setup is like, you want to point this to the Ethereum client. Right now, we're just going to be using EthSigner running in a Docker container, and then Ganache, which is our Ethereum client, running locally on localhost or 127.0.0.1 8545. Downstream HTTP port, that's 8545, so that matches our Ganache. And then our HTTP listen host, so for this specific setup, we're gonna have it be .0.0.0.0 0. It's essentially saying we can listen on all interfaces. That's going to allow us to interact with EthSigner from locally, just using this 8596 port. So that's the HTTP listen port. So we can do 127.0.1 8596. That's, make curl calls to that and essentially interact with EthSigner. So we're going to be doing that in a little bit. And lastly, you have the file-based signer configurations. That's just pointing to the key file as well as the password file that we created. And I noticed a typo. It should be capital F also in the right location. So when we copied it over in the Docker file, we copied it over into just opt/key file and password file respectively. And again, you can have that be anywhere else. Just make sure that when you define it in your Docker file initially, that's consistent with this config.toml, or else it's going to yell at you. So save this, and I believe that looks great. Permission issues. So adding this to your Docker file, just giving the proper permission is essential, or else you run into issues. So great, VS Code was helpful. I thought it was like me not pasting things properly or typing things properly using Vim, but we got to figure it out. And we're gonna run that again, but instead of exposing 8545 in the run command, we're gonna do 8596, because essentially that's where EthSigner is gonna be listening, and that's where we're gonna map our 8596 on our host to the 8596 in the container. We're gonna run it again, and it's gonna run, start listening on 8596. Perfect. Let's open up a new terminal and go to the documentation, and there's a couple of curl commands that they provide. So we can query the block number, for example. Just copy this curl command and paste it onto our terminal, and you can see we are currently on block 0 because there hasn't been any activity. Oh, and I realized one thing. So when we queried the block number, we queried the Ganache instance directly, because we pointed to 127.0.1 port 8545, and of course it gave us the block number, and it's going to work with ETH accounts too as well. However, what we want to do is essentially, if you remember the diagram that we started the video with, we want to query the blockchain through EthSigner. So EthSigner is running on 8596. So if you go ahead and query 8596, it's going to return an account, which is great, but we just did that through the EthSigner running in the Docker container. Let's go ahead and send a transaction, and these are just these are real transactions, but I'm not sure what they do. And then we'll paste it, and we want to change a few things. We actually want to change the from and to, because those are real accounts that we're sending. So let's copy the from, which is going to be the us, so our first account that we hooked up EthSigner, and then let's send it to the second account. And then obviously when you develop your decentralized application, you're not going to be calling curl commands. This is just for example, but if you use like a library such as Web3j or Web3js, they are essentially making these calls just behind the scene. And then one thing we'll change is the port number as well, because we're not going to use Ganache directly. Again, we're going to be using EthSigner, which is running on 8596. So cool, and it returned a hash, and as you can see, this has been working too as well. Another thing you can verify is Ganache. So if you go into Ganache and go under transactions, you can see that there is a transaction that occurred. That's the one that we just sent through EthSigner and successfully signed using that file-based signer method. So that's great. You have set up EthSigner through a Docker image, and you're able to interact with it, and it's connected to Ganache, which is your Ethereum node. Now you can change that to maybe, like I said, Hyperledger Bisu, or there's other nodes that you can use, or Ethereum clients, but essentially you have the gist of it. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. If I messed up on anything, overlooked anything, or if I could do something better, definitely leave a comment as well, because I definitely like to learn as I'm learning with you guys and gals. Thank you for tuning in, making the community that much better. Leave any requests or any questions, like I said, down in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe for more great content. Thank you. Have a good one.